This is the 10-Minute Contrarian Podcast. This is VP. We are a solutions-based podcast, diving into the world of contrarian investing and alternative finance. You can find us hosted on the No Nonsense Forex YouTube channel, NoNonsenseForex.com, and podcast players everywhere. Let's go ahead and skip ad reads this week for a couple reasons. One, markets are kind of slow. Nobody really cares right now. And two, to screw over those of you who like to try and skip over my ad read. You scumbags. Now you're going to miss part of the show. But let's go ahead and get into things. Now, we're talking dividends today because I mentioned this almost in passing in a blog months ago. And I got a really great response out of it. Way bigger than I ever expected. Turns out a lot of you are really into these things, whether you're actively participating in them now or whether you're just flat out interested in them for the future and would like my take on them. So let me go ahead and give you that here in episode 167. Now, by the way, I already got this train rolling a little bit with a blog post I put out yesterday. For those of you listening to this in the future, the blog post was called Just Buy the S&P, Bro. And by the way, let me just say it again because I seem to always get this question. If you ever want to know where certain past blog posts or past videos might be, you go to that particular platform and you go to the search bar and you type the topic in or you type the title in. It will pop up. Please do not go to the comments section and ask me where something is when a simple search would have gotten you there otherwise. Now, I do bring this up a lot, but please understand I still have PTSD from 2019 when my channel was blowing up and 85% of my viewers were just completely helpless and wanted their hands held every step of the way when they could have easily just done all these things themselves. And the fail rate of these people is about as close to 100% as you're going to find. So you don't really want to help them anyway because you're just wasting your time. But I digress. Moving on. Now, to start things off, I always say this is a solutions-based podcast, which it is. And it may not seem like there's going to be solutions in this episode, but believe me, there will be. So stay tuned until the back half of the show for that. But I am really happy to see the enthusiasm behind dividend stocks and dividend vehicles because think about it. How great would it be? I want you to picture this. Let's say the recession that we're all preparing for has come and we are towards the end of it. And we, contrarians, obviously, are one of the few people who actually came out the other side alive. You know, we took some bumps and bruises too, but not as much as everybody else did. And if you're losing less than everybody else, then you, my friend, are winning. And in this fantasy scenario I'm bringing up, we have won because we played defense. And we know when things get desperate, people are also going to try to come after us. So we separated our wealth, what little we may have had, into many different avenues. They may have shut down one of our bank accounts. They may have shut down one of our crypto on and off ramps. But in the end, it didn't matter because we had many of each. We had a lot of money in gold and cash because we know how well those things do in a recession. Bitcoin finally decoupled from the American stock market. Because of the huge credit crisis, a lot of banks went under, and people understood what a new safe haven this could possibly be. And because Bitcoin went up, a lot of crypto went up too. You know, people are always going to look for alpha somewhere. And because of that, a lot of our crypto, a lot of our mining stocks went up. And oh, by the way, they finally realized that energy might be scarce. And if we are going to come out of this in one piece, we're going to need cheap energy and a lot of it. Problem is, we don't have enough of it for what we are trying to do. So now that whole commodity cycle that we talk about on the show is finally ramping up, and we got in early. The younger generations also got wiped out, and now they are all depressed and have no way to make money unless they're in the metaverse and playing Web3 gaming, and we got well ahead of that. So now not only do we make it out the other side in one piece, we are now sitting on a pile of money. How great. Now what? I mean, we'd all like to quit our jobs, but when a monkey is swinging from branch to branch, he doesn't let go of the branch he was just on unless he has a firm grasp of the branch ahead of him. In contrarian investing parlance, don't get rid of your passport unless you already have another passport you can fall back on. You know, I get it because I've been there. Getting rid of your job, getting rid of that steady money is a real scary thing. Even if you feel like you're totally able to do it, it's still not an easy transition. So you are going to want to transition to something that is going to pay you constantly. And there's a lot of ways to do this. One, you could start a business. A good recommendation, I think, especially in a recovering market. It may be a bit slow at first, but as the market recovers, demand for whatever you're selling is probably going to increase as well. When you're catching the market in its early stages of recovery, it makes it a whole lot easier to succeed if everything else is moving up with you, as opposed to the other way around. Because people in general are more willing to spend, they're more willing to take chances. And so I think that's a great way. If you haven't done that yet, starting a business at that point is a great way to make constant money from here on out. Another really great way is what we have talked about in an episode called FYPM, F You Pay Me. And that is to get your passives in order. Get them in order now, of course. Everybody should be doing that right now. But down the road, the more money you have to put into passives, the more passives you make, because passives are percentage based. And one of those passives is dividends. Now you can play dividends one of two ways. Again, let's say this whole scenario that I just drew up actually plays out somewhat like I drew it up. Now, you can either attempt to live off the dividends you make or reinvest those dividends and just allow that account over off to the side to snowball and get bigger and bigger. I mean, how many of you have enough money saved up for retirement? Like an amount that you're happy with? All of zero of you? Yeah, me too. It's pretty scary if you think about it. But what I plan on doing is having, at this point, really two halves. One, I'm still going to be looking for asymmetric opportunities. And God willing, if this podcast is still around, I will be sharing them with you. But what I also hope to do a lot more of is, on the other half, talk about those passives. Talk about all of those different opportunities you see in the dividend world, because dividends are awesome. Remember, I say it all the time, we are not a perma-bear podcast. I am just long-term bearish right now, and I've been preparing for what might come ever since this podcast has been in existence. And even though that moment hasn't happened yet, it's almost good because it just gives us that much more time to prepare, which is never really a bad thing. I'm not somebody who is hoping for a recession, possibly depression, where, everybody loses their savings and their jobs and gets depressed and takes drastic measures and whatever comes from that. I'm not looking forward to that day. But if I feel like there's a chance of it coming anyway, and we have, let's be honest, a more increased chance of those things happening now than we ever have probably since we've been alive, then I want to at least be ready for it. But there will also come a time where I get quite bullish because I feel like the worst might be over. And the overall tenor of this podcast, like I said, if I'm still around, let's hope I am, is going to change. Because as a contrarian, when everybody else is dooming and glooming and they think this thing is just going to last for the rest of the decade, we will hopefully see some really great opportunities. And most contrarians will be looking at the market and saying, you know what? We might actually be coming out of this, despite what most people think. And this is going to be when more traditional vehicles make sense. There is a time and a place for everything, which is why we will not be talking about dividend stocks anytime soon on this podcast. It's just not time. These are traditional risk-on vehicles. When have we ever talked about those things on this podcast? Maybe a couple times, because like I said, time and a place. But overall, why would I want to allocate a chunk of my money to traditional investment vehicles when I am preparing for a prolonged and pretty bad recession? It doesn't make any sense. Now, let's say I'm wrong and we don't get a recession for a couple of years still. Well, at that point, I still don't care because I want to hold on to these things and let them grow for a very long time. I don't want to just have them there for a year or so and then cut bait when it's time to cut bait. It doesn't make any sense. I would rather be invested in the things I'm invested in right now. In a perfect scenario, I want to catch these things as close to the recovery as I can, because at that point, I will also have what we love on this podcast, and that is downside protection. Once we enter this next phase, we're going to take a much more, I guess, what I would call grown-up approach to where downside protection is going to mean a lot more than it currently does right now. And it means a lot right now, but it's going to mean even more later on. Again, this is the type of money that we plan on living off of or saving for our own retirement. You are going to want to take far less chances when it comes to this particular category. Like I said before, you can play two halves. You can take chances on one side, and you can play a lot safer on the other side. It's kind of what we do now, playing offense and defense. But once the recession has already washed out, then there's going to be less need to play defense. So things like dividend stocks and such are going to turn into our new version of defense. And so I think it's pretty clear, the best way to invest in these things is not at or near the top of a market. It is at or near the bottom. So while I really do appreciate the enthusiasm for these things, and I'm really happy that I have a more, I guess, grown-up and mature thinking audience, despite your actual age. And I'm also delighted that you guys value my opinion on these things and are thirsty to know more. The timing just is not appropriate, in my mind, at all. Because even if they give nice dividends, they still all go down in a recession. Now, I understand the dividends you earn might mitigate that downside, but I would still much rather allocate my money to something like gold and cash and start DCAing into energy stocks and things like that. However, I said I would give you a solution, and this might not be the most exciting solution in the world. I think it's pretty exciting, but there is absolutely something you can do right now, like this moment after you get off this podcast. We've spoken about just how important these things could be to our overall finances and our overall lives, right? Problem is, it's not super simple. There's a lot to know if you want to do this right, and especially if you want to do this optimally, which I would imagine everybody who listens to this podcast wants to do. We never do things at 100% optimization, but we try to get it as close as we can. Because why on earth wouldn't you? Every little percentage makes a big, big difference down the road if you really are a long-term holder, which we are, and which we're certainly going to be once dividend season comes around. So what you need to be doing right now is to learn. Learn as much as you possibly can. Start with a book. There's many books on dividend stock investing out there. I have read a handful of them already. They're all pretty good. I can't even give you one recommendation. Just go see what gets really good ratings and start there. These books are cheap. Read 2 or 3 of them. If you don't like one, you'll probably like the other 2. And get a good base. Once you've done that, you can start branching into some YouTube channels and some podcasts that go into this a lot deeper. And no, you don't need a recommendation here either. These are very easy to find. Now, as a bonus in the background, depending on where you are from, you might not have access to the best suite of investments here. And you're going to want to, because there's a lot of different ways you can go here, believe it or not. There's dividend stocks. There's dividend ETFs. There's very high-yielding instruments. You're going to want to know if those are right for you or not. Spoiler alert, I gave you a way to find out the total return of these things in the blog post I mentioned at the top of the show. A lot of these ETFs deal in covered calls. You're probably going to know what those are. What do you know about CEFs? Huh? Very cool, by the way. There's a lot out there, and you're going to want access to these things. Now, we've talked on the show before, if you're not an American citizen, for example, there is ways you can get access to the American market by the way of an ITIN number. Do your own research there. I don't want to advise people on things like that because, one, I've never had to do it myself. I am American. So it's just not something I know a lot about and cannot really advise anybody on. But in a perfect world, you are going to want to at least have access to, whether you choose to go these routes or not, stocks, ETFs, high yielding, and CEFs, closed-end funds. So if you're not able to do that in your part of the world, figure it out. But all of these things also have a lot of nuances to them, and there's a lot of things you're going to have to know. Once you finally get to this point, and you're dealing with something that's going to be either what you live off of, or your future retirement or your children's college fund or whatever you're going to do this for, do you want to take a novice approach to it? Do you want to fumble around and make a bunch of mistakes? Or do you want to do all of those things right now? Not only should you be learning about all things dividend related right now, you should be taking that knowledge and applying it by paper trading. And there's a lot of places where you can go do this. Now, you guys know the approach I take on this podcast is a bit more of a novice approach. I just kind of introduce you to things and let you take the ball and run with it. So what I'm really hoping happens by the time we finally get to talking dividends often on this podcast is the majority of you are just like, VP, I already knew all this stuff. Why are you wasting my time? Because you're already super educated on this stuff. And education goes a long way. I know there's some people right now that said, oh, why would I invest in dividends when I can just do this? Or I've heard dividend stocks are bad because you probably saw the title of a YouTube channel, or you probably saw somebody mention it on TV, and you just kind of took it and ran with it. Educate yourself more. Maybe when it's all said and done, you don't want to go this route, and that's fine. But what's the back half of your life worth? It's a long time. People say life is short. Life is long. Life is the longest thing that will ever happen to you. Do you want it to suck like it does for most people? Or do you want it to be pleasurable and fruitful and exciting? Over time, I've met a lot of rich people. I've met a lot of rich older people. They all get paid in dividends somehow. May as well be you. Now, you might be sitting there thinking it's too soon to sit there and learn about these things. You have a lot of time. The recession hasn't even happened yet. It might not happen for a while, and who knows how long it's going to last. And why would I waste all this time learning about one thing? Well, for a couple reasons. One, we have no idea what the timetable of this is going to be. It might come and go like the COVID recession did. We might get a soft landing, and it could end up being go time a lot sooner than we thought it was going to be. So no, it's not crazy to learn about stuff like this right freaking now. But even if it is, that's fine, because we're okay with being crazy, as long as that means we're early.